Welcome, everyone. I am Zach Jones with Vertical Measures, and I'm here hosting VM's monthly webinar series. Today's webinar is titled Story Marketing, How to Own Your Story to Grow Your Business. And it'll be presented by our guest host, Park Howell. Park is the founder of Business of Story Platform, a trusted brand story strategist, sought-after speaker on story marketing, and is the professor of storytelling in the Executive Masters of Sustainability Leadership at Arizona State University. Go Devils! He helps leaders of purpose-driven organizations clarify their story to grow revenue and amplify their impact. Park is a 30-year advertising veteran and now consults, teaches, coaches, and speaks around the world, helping executives advance their brand initiatives further and faster through the power of story. But before we get started and I hand it over, I just want to go over a few housekeeping notes. Today's webinar will be available for viewing by tomorrow, and we'll send out an email to all of our registrants with a link, so don't worry. We'll also be happy to answer any of your questions, so if you have any, check out your little GoToWebinar dashboard there, and there's a questions tab. Feel free to ask through that. You could also ask through our hashtag VMWebinar on Twitter. So go ahead and do that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Park.
And great to be here. What a great way to kick off Thursday. I always look forward to these and sharing what I've learned over many decades of doing storytelling in business. And before I get started, I want to give a quick shout out to Jordan Lacey. Thanks, Jordan. Just saw you on Twitter. She said she was signing up coming, and apparently she's been following some of the things we've been doing here. So love to have those shout outs. And speaking of that, you see the hashtags here, hashtag VMWebinar and hashtag StoryOn. Well, the StoryOn one is mine on Twitter. And as you go throughout the show, you can certainly ask questions over at Twitter or comment as you go of what is working for you, what impacts you, and so forth. At the end of the webinar, I've got a special gift. It's a $50 value, but people have been using it, and it's been invaluable to help them clarify their story and grow their brands. And I'm talking to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I'm going to be giving away 3 of those gifts at the end of the show. What I'll do is go back through Twitter, find out who's used the StoryOn and the VMWebinar hashtags. I will randomly select 3 of you, and you will get this free prize, but you got to stick around to the very end. Glad to have you here. And as Zach mentioned, I have and do teach, in addition to doing many, many other things, at Arizona State University. In fact, I just got back from Amsterdam. Here is our 2017 cohort in our Executive Masters program, and we go over there every year, and we work with big organizations like Philips Electronics, KPN, and it's really fascinating because these folks are all working on their MBA in leadership, and I have the due pleasure of teaching them communications and especially storytelling to help them advance their social initiatives further faster. The week before we did this is actually a picture taken on Thursday, June 23rd, I think it was. I go in a week early and I work with some NGOs over there in a town called Haarlemmeer. Haarlemmeer is a suburb of Amsterdam, and I work with, in this case, this group of circular economy. These are all sustainability professionals that work for both NGOs, nonprofits, and other organizations that are trying to amplify the power of circular economy. So I go in and I spent a half day with them working through a very similar workshop, and I met this guy. Now, not the guy on the left who's kind of surly and looking at you. That's Rolf. Rolf's great. Rolf is a bureaucrat over there. He is one hell of a storyteller, by the way. But what's funny is his mind started shutting down on story once you started talking business. That's what we're going to do today, is get your brain to open back up about story when you're in business. But the guy I want you to look at is the guy on the right. That is Zach. Now, Zach is a young man. He's studying sustainability. He's working on his BA degree over there at the University of Amsterdam, and he's working as an intern for one of the groups, one of the NGOs that was here. And as I was working through these folks on their storytelling, we had them each focus on a really important audience. And guess who Zach's audience was? Zach's audience was, in his term, his granddad. And the reason why his granddad is his old man was saying, you know, I don't know why you're wasting your time. I don't get sustainability. I don't believe in global warming, especially man-made global warming. I think you're on a fool's errand. Why are you doing this? And I could tell this really impacted Zach in a big way. He was just looking for approval from his granddad. So what I did is worked with everybody around there, worked with their various constituents and audiences. But with Zach, I said, Zach, I want you to use what I'm going to teach you to go and have a conversation with your granddad this week about why you're doing what you're doing in sustainability. But you need to tell the story from your granddad's perspective. So he did. And I didn't really think I would ever see Zach again. Well, about 5 days later, we were back over in Haarlemmermeer with our gathering from ASU, and we were doing a big workshop with them on some other areas in sustainability, and Zach showed up halfway through, and he had this gigantic grin on his face, and I went up to Zach, I said, hey man, what's up? And he said, you won't believe it, my granddad now believes in climate change, and he's totally behind what I'm doing in studying sustainability. And I said, how did you do that? He goes, well, I told him how important it was to me. And he said, I wanted to show him the impact that we were having on the climate by man-made and man-spewing carbon. And so I pulled out a hockey stick and I put it on the side and I showed him, here are normal carbon levels over millennia until about 1950 when we see this steep uptick. And he said his granddad immediately understood now what the problem was through this hockey stick. And I asked Zach, I said, does your granddad like hockey? He goes, like it. He loves it. So I had to really take my hat off to Zach because he turned this data and he turned this very complex story into a very simple story that his granddad could understand from his granddad's point of view, even using that hockey stick prop to bring data alive and make it interesting and making it very dramatic. So I wanted to share that with you because you don't have to have gigantic stories to have a big impact. They can be small stories, very well told, very simple, to really start moving people to action. And so in all the years that I've been studying and sharing storytelling with people, there's some truth, some wisdom that I've gotten out of this. And one of the really surprising things is, do you realize that our brain is very much like the amoeba and they have just one goal, and that is simply survival. If you think about it, we can go weeks without eating, we can go days without drinking, but you and I can literally only go about 35 seconds without our subconscious trying to create meaning out of something going on around us. And by the way, our brains are meaning-making machines, and they use story to do that. You think about it, our subconscious constantly scans our environment, probing for clues beneath the surface with this embedded app that we all call curiosity. It's unique to the human spirit. Now, curiosity is like our basal search engine that takes in stimuli and it filters it through past experience to help our brain predict the future. And why does our brain want to predict the future? Because it simply wants to create clarity out of the chaos of being alive. Survival. Now, we're very, very fortunate as a human species because nature has uniquely equipped humans with this critical survival tool, this tool called story. Why is it important? Because it simply draws our rapt attention. So we know if we need to fight, flight, or even delight in what's happening around us. We make that meaning through story. You know, we live vicariously through the heroes in our stories so we can try on their trouble just so we can learn what we would do in case it happens to us. Now, all great stories, they have urgency, they have novelty and surprise, and they all deliver a truth. That's what our brains are constantly scanning for. So we're in this advertising, marketing, content marketing world, and we're constantly trying to connect with our audiences and deliver them a basic truth about our product or service that can help them get what they want. Now, I'm thinking back to Zach's story. The truth of the matter is we have this enormous challenge of global warming and man-made global warming. And we know where Trump stands on this. And by the way, I can tell you that Trump pulling us out of the climate accords is the best thing that ever happened to climate change, because now actually the world has a villain to pit all of their efforts again. But I'm not here to be pushing global warming and sustainability and whatever. I just want to use this as a really interesting example of how a young man used a very basic story to turn data into drama by sharing the story from his old man's point of view. And now his granddad's totally on board. And you know what Zach gets out of this whole thing? He gets that wisdom and he gets that confidence that he has the full support of someone very, very important in his life. And that's what it's all about. So we're here, and Vertical Measures is so great to bring me on. I really appreciate and honored to be here. But it's all about content, right? They deal in the world of content, and I'm assuming you deal in the world of content. And to me, of course, content is extraordinarily important, but content term alone is a little bit like the data on this. I want you to start thinking of content is truly king. I want you to think about storytelling as being the kingdom sorcerer. It's where the magic truly happens. So when I think of content, I think of everything from blog posts and podcasts and videos, infographics, Snapchats, images, content, content, content. So if we just approach content and for content's sake, it doesn't mean anything to people out there. In fact, we are bombarded with it. I would argue that ADD is now a communicable disease, and we are all the viruses because we're spewing content, content, content. What I want you to do with your content is start putting it in terms of story. And I'm going to show you today a very simple way. I call it my storytelling dumbbells. It's something you lift every single day, use every day, and you will all of a sudden start reprogramming your brain to what it was first pre-wired for, and that is to see the world through storytelling lens, share content through storytelling lens, and connect with people, move them to action. I call this, instead of content marketing, story marketing. And my definition for story marketing is simply this. Story marketing is a strategic marketing approach that creates a brand experience through audio, visual, and immersive storytelling, whereby the customer becomes the center of the story to drive profitable engagement. Now, why is that important? Well, I've been in the advertising world for 30 years, and I ran my own ad agency for 20 of those years. And I can tell you, when I really first started storytelling, it was about 15 years ago, when our middle son was going to Hollywood. And the reason why that was important to me is because I had to study what Hollywood knew about storytelling, because our advertising just wasn't working like it used to. It wasn't nearly effective. And the reason being is the brands used to own the influence of mass media, but now the masses are the media. They own your story. So you and your brand become the story makers, the story creators. You invite your audiences into your story, and then you hand your story off to them and make it their own so that they can share it with the world out there. That, to me, is the difference between story marketing and just simply content marketing. Now, why does this work? Well, the same time that our son was going to film school over in Chapman University, and by the way, he's been working in Hollywood ever since 2010, and if you saw the new CBS TV show Candy Crush on Sunday night, he and one other guy handled all the motion graphics work for that. So he is embedded in Hollywood, and I'm having a fun time watching him grow in the VR world. And I'm learning a lot in the process because I learned what Hollywood knows about storytelling that we all can use. While this was going on in about 2008-9, our youngest son, Cade, had to have some brain surgery. And so, it was pretty shocking for us. He had encephalitis, some swelling in the brain. Got it taken care of down at Barrows Neurological Center. Thank God we're blessed with one of the top neurological centers in the world. And now he's 23 years old. He's an EDM artist, and he's doing well. But while he was going through this, I was studying everything I could find about how the brain is going to respond to this swelling, especially as a young man. And I came across a book called The Storytelling Animal by Jonathan Gottschall. And it was just like the perfect timing because it gave me this intersection of story structure and brain structure and how our brains, in Jonathan's terms, yield helplessly to the suction of story. So this had like enormous impact on me. And I'm going to show you a video, very quick video. It's about a minute. It's called the Heider-Simmel Study. I first learned about it through Jonathan's book, and I've used it in every presentation ever since. Now, there's no audio with it. This was produced back in 1948. It's fairly crude compared to, our high-tech video production this day and age. But I want you to take a deep breath, grab a cup of coffee, if it's sitting right there, and settle back. I'm going to shut up here for the next minute or so, and I just want to watch this video, and I want you to see what kind of story is it telling you. Okay, pretty weird, huh? And I'm just going to let that screen sit there blank while you're thinking about this. So what did you see going down that video? I can tell you every single workshop I've ever given, I've shown this video. A lot of the same stories we hear is domestic violence. Something's going down in a home that ain't so cool, and maybe it's the kids, and one kid rescues another, and the old man goes in and breaks the place up. I hear love triangle, love Christs. I heard one time when I was presenting this to 60 Arizona librarians in the Arizona Librarian Association, which I love the irony of that, by the way, me teaching librarians about story. One lady said, I saw kids trying to catch butterflies. And another one said, I saw a cat and a dog playing. Well, regardless of what you see in there, what I find interesting in this is, did you see how your brain had to absolutely connect the dots and create meaning out of literally very abstract shapes, data that was being presented to you? There were no faces, there were no people, there was no audio, obviously, no music. There was some editing that might suggest something, but essentially you're just seeing shapes floating around the screen, and your brain has to create meaning. It has to understand, what is this? And so what does it do? It knits together a story. And as implausible as that story might be, it has to knit together a story because, as Jonathan Haidt said in his really, really terrific book called The Righteous Mind, our brains are not logic processors, we're story processors. So your brain probably, if you're one out of the 100, or if you're one of the 139 out of 140 people, your brain knitted together a story. That other person is so left brain analytical, nothing wrong with that. They just saw stuff flying around. But I like to show that because to me it underscores this whole concept of story is primal. Our brains are absolutely pre-wired for it. We tend to be at the tops of our storytelling games in kindergarten, and then our storyteller gets suppressed. It gets pushed back when we're asked to draw within the lines, be quiet, stop telling stories. Everything about our education culture, our corporate culture, societal constructs tends to frown on story, and yet I can tell you, story is the single most powerful tool you have at your disposal. I do call it your one true superpower because you can move people to action through the bewitchery of story. When I learned how Hollywood started using this, so I combined what we learned with our son going through it, with his brain surgery and everything I read about that, and what our other son learned in going to Hollywood, I learned about the hero's journey through Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell being America's foremost mythologist, he found this universal structure to story he called the hero's journey. I boiled it down, and we created this 10-step story map that we started using with our clients, and I call it the story cycle. It takes you and it makes you approach everything from high-level brand storytelling, or story creation, story strategy, right down to your individual elements of story, and you can use the same pattern, the same map to take you through strategy right down to tactical execution. We started using this in some of our clients, and it was kind of a science project because I wasn't sure what was going to happen, but it absolutely blew up. It was fantastic. We helped Adelante Healthcare reinvent their story, reframe their story after 30 years as a community health center into a sustainable healthcare operation, and in the last 5 years they have grown by more than 300% after they clarified their story and reauthored what their organization is all about. They don't do any advertising, they don't do marketing or PR because they have more business that they know what to do with, all because they got their story straight. We also use this for Goodwill of Central Arizona, which grew by more than 400% over a decade of getting their story pulled together. About the same time, Coca-Cola came to us, and I was working with another group here in Arizona, and they wanted to launch an eco-driving program within their 60,000 member fleet driving workforce. So they were going at it very much as, cleaning the skies. They wanted to be very green about the whole thing, but we explained to them that was just going to be off-putting to their drivers, that we needed to tell the story from the driver's point of view. So therefore, the eco-driving solutions, as you can see, we make the driver the hero of this particular story. And in this case, eco-driving isn't about ecological driving, it's about economy driving, so that they'd be saving money on fuel, gas, maintenance, while decreasing their impact on the world. Coca-Cola, after launching this, in just the first 3 months of the program, doubled its projected savings. And again, I think it's all because they really got the story right, and they told the story by including their drivers at the center of it. And that's the most important thing for you to remember right now. Whether you are working on a personal brand story or a professional brand story, meaning a story for maybe a client's brand or your own business brand or whatever, I want you to always place your audiences and your customers as the hero, that little Lego man right there, at the center of the story, and you actually play a much more important role as their mentor or guide. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the 10-step story cycle process, but what today I really want to focus on is showing you this dumbbell that you can start using right now. So if you got a pen and paper ready, I want you to really be focused on telling your own, either your personal brand story or your professional brand story. So in my case, I could either be talking about my Howell brand or the Business of Story brand. But for you, grab one of those two. If you want to build your personal brand and influence around that, then then use this next exercise to do that. If you are trying to do it for a larger organization, have that in the back of your mind. But here's what I want to teach you. This is a really, really simple way before you actually apply the 10-step story cycle system. Now let's go back to this concept of story is literally what took us from cavemen to consumers. Storytelling is more important to our survival than our opposable thumbs. It's how we make meaning out of the world. And there's really something interesting that comes out of this. That story is so basic, it's so primal, it comes in 3 steps. And you can see it throughout time. So here's our Thag, the caveman up top. Thag he gets back to the fire and he sees his buddy Thog there, and Thog's like, hey, what's up, man? And Thag goes, you know, I was just down at the stream and I caught myself a gigantic salmon and it was awesome. And Thog goes, uh-huh. So we've got the setup for the story. He goes, but then a saber-toothed tiger shows up and it comes lunging at me. Thog goes, uh-oh. So now we've got conflict. We got a problem that needs to be resolved. Thog says, so what'd you do? I want to know what I would do in case it happens to me. What does Thag say? He goes, well, I hit the saber-toothed tiger over the face with the salmon, and apparently liked the salmon better than me. It took it and ran off, and I'm back here to tell you the story. And what does Thog say? Aha, the learning moment. So as basic and primal as that is, uh-huh, uh-oh, aha, that is a basic structure of story. Aristotle called it, you have a beginning, you got a middle, and you have an end. Shakespeare, of course, introduction, rising action, and climax. Mozart, did you know the sonata allegro form is built out of 3-act story structure of exposition, development, and resolution. Hegel, the philosopher, talked about argument, and argument is based on thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And finally, Spielberg and the rest of Hollywood, setup, conflict, resolution. So these 3 steps to story are hugely important, and yet in business we often leave out the middle part because that's where all the conflict resolves, and businesses don't like to talk about conflict. But I want you to start putting conflict in your stories, focusing on that conflict, because that is the marrow to a great story. In fact, I even learned this from another remarkable philosopher, and that would be Cartman. Do you realize there's a video called 6 Days to Air that Matt Stone and Trey Parker talk about how they create the shows. And they both have a big hand at writing the scripts, and when a script is not working, they do something called the rule of replacement. They take out ands and they add a but or replace it with a but or therefore, because it puts conflict into the story. And it's something you can use when you have content that you're trying to write about. It could be a blog post, it could be a brochure, whatever. If you feel like it's going on and on and on and you're not really making the point you want to make, start taking out the ands and replace them with buts in there for us. I learned this from a great friend of mine, Randy Olson. He is literally a PhD, Harvard PhD biologist who then went to USC Film School, and got his degree in film, made 3 films on climate, environment, global warming, and he's written 3 books. His goal now is to help scientists become better at telling stories. This book, Houston, We Have a Narrative, is all about how to use this ABT structure in telling a story. So let me show you really quick, and then I want you to think about, you start taking notes on how you would use the ABT structure for your story. So let me set the stage very quickly for me. Zach kind of did this up top for you, talking about me, but let's go again. So leaders of purpose-driven organizations are on critical missions. Statement of agreement. Everyone can agree with that. And I want to up the ante a little bit. And they have important stories to tell for growth. Now comes the conflict. But they're not being heard in the cacophony of today's attention deficit economy, and they're drowning in the sea of sameness. Therefore, to rise above the noise, brands must clarify their story to grow revenue, amplify their impact, and simplify their life. So I can tell that story as like a 1-floor elevator pitch. Boom, boom, boom. I can tell it with less than 20 seconds, and I have hooked the reptilian brain with this and, but, and therefore, this Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, this infusion of conflict into my story with the big but, and how do you resolve it? So I want you to start thinking about how you do this in telling your own story or your own brand story. Every single time you have to write anything, start with an ABT. First, get your thoughts around the ABT. I literally call the ABT the DNA of story because it is such a powerful and simple foundation that it will help guide you in all the rest of your storytelling. So here I just broke it out. You can do a screenshot on this, or I know that Vertical Measures will make this available after the fact. But here's kind of how I broke it down. You can see how I extracted leaders of purpose-driven organizations are on critical missions, and they have important stories to tell, but, and so on, and therefore, they need to tell stories to grow revenue, amplify impact, and simplify their life. Here's actually a slide that may help you even more. This is the one that you're going to want to hold on to and start drafting your stories this way. Make a declarative statement of agreement that everybody can agree with, and increase its importance. So now you've set the stage. You literally are in Act 1 of a story. But you've got conflict. Something has to happen. Something that shakes up the world, shakes people out of status quo, that is a contradiction or a conflict to what you have said or could imperil what you just said. Therefore, resolve the problem. And of course, if it's about you and your brand story, then you are there as a mentor or guide. You are there to help them resolve what their problem is. This is the single most powerful exercise I have ever found in first crafting a story and getting the foundation for a story. I can't underscore it enough. Even for a dang tweet, you can go through this. What's my setup, problem, resolution in 140 characters or less? So it's really, really amazing. So I ask you to, in the short amount of time we have today, to really think about this and start exercising those. And if you want to send me yours as you write them up, I'd be happy to look at them and give you my input on them. You can, send your ABTs to me at park@businessofstory.com. But what I also want to do now is very quickly is just to jump into the 10-step story cycle process. I really simplified it for today's show, but it's something that you can go over to Business of Story, download free tools. In fact, I've got this free field guide that I take and I use at all of my trainings. There's an interactive version on it at businessofstory.com/tools. At the bottom of my tools page, you can download it and you can start. First do your ABT and then start expanding and creating the nuances of your story through this very universal structure of story that I learned from Hollywood, that I learned from Joseph Campbell in The Hero's Journey, but it's simplified and mapped to our world and business. So we start with the backstory, chapter 1, if you will. And if you're doing a brand program, if you're trying to use this for brand strategy, this is where your position statement comes in. This is the position, what do you do better than anybody else in your particular offering? So in terms of features and benefits, this is your first step out of that primordial muck of commoditization, position statement. And it's really as simple as asking this question, what do you do better than anyone else? And how can you absolutely own that position, even if it means you got to dial up your operations a little bit to really pull that off. Then you move to chapter 2, who's your hero? This is all about the audience. Or I also say, who cares about what you do? Now, this is always like a landmark moment for brands. I'm so surprised that they place themselves at the center of the story. They think because they're there offering a solution that they're the hero of the journey. You're not. I hate to tell you, you're not. You play the more important role of guide mentor, which we'll come to in chapter 6. What I want to do right now is understand who is your audience. When we do this brand story strategy for folks, I always ask them just to find their first 3 audiences and prioritize them. Then, as we go through the strategy workshop, we focus on just their number 1 audience and make sure we get the story completely dialed in to that group. And because then once they learn how to do that, it's very easy for them to reshape the story for audience 2 and audience 3. You always want to have this themed meta story, but you're going to tell it a little bit differently depending on who your audience is and what their point of view is. Number 3. Chapter 3 is what's at stake. Look, you got to have something at stake to have a story move forward. If you don't have compelling stakes, there's no reason for the story. You're going to lose your audience. If you don't have compelling stakes in a market for what you have to offer, there is no market. You have nothing to sell. So what's at stake for your audience? What do they want? And up top you see under what's at stake, what do they stand to gain by getting on board with you with your product or service, and what do they stand to lose by remaining in status quo? 2 questions to really consider as you're putting your overall large framework together around your brand story, be it a personal brand or a professional brand. Then we move into chapter 4, the call to adventure. This is where your unique value proposition comes in. And why I talk or put the unique value proposition at this point, because what we're trying to do is start to humanize that position statement. So in chapter 1, you've declared what you do better than anybody else. Now you start have to humanizing it to your audiences, because you really have to understand, why do they want it? Why is it they want what you have to offer? They might not even know that you're the person offering it or it's available through you, but they're wondering, what do they have? What do you have? Why do they want it? Because you're going to attach, that's going to help color and inform your unique value proposition. Call to adventure. This is so important, because in the marketplace, man, if you don't have change, you don't have an opportunity to sell into that change, to be that guide or mentor to help people through that. So really important they have a powerful call to adventure and understand why they want what they want. Next up, chapter 5, villains, fog, and crevasses. The obstacles and antagonists that your audience is up against that you're going to help them achieve. Now, why I have this here is I want you to get really crystal clear on what they're up against. So the villains. Now, this can look at both your brand side or your client side. From your brand standpoint, the villains are your competition. Who's out there trying to take away market share from you? Also, the internal villains. Who and what is inside your organization and or inside of your head telling you you're not good enough, fast enough, strong enough? How do you overcome those villains? The fog or the blind spots. What is it you don't know that you are going to find and be open to during your journey of this? For your customers, it's what don't they know about you that you have to offer them, and how can you clarify and simplify that story so that they understand it? And then finally, the crevasses are that gap in what you say and what you actually do. So when you get really good at storytelling, you are going to draw in lots of audiences. You're going to become a magnet for them. And whatever promises you make in your stories, you better be able to deliver in how you execute on it. So this is where you get really clear on the obstacles and antagonists in your life. And when it comes down to your audience, the basic question is, they want something. Why don't they already have it? What is standing in their way from getting what they want that you can help them? And you can help them as, by the way, their mentor. This is chapter 6, enter the mentor. This is where you get to focus on you. I guess this is the selfie chapter, but it's really, really important because it asks the question, how are you equipped to help them get it? And the 3 areas that we look at when we're doing brand strategy here, and I'll ask you to think about, is what is your emotional promise? Meaning, when they work with you, everyone from your employees to your shareholders, stakeholders, to your customers, to your vendors, emotionally, what do they get by being connected with you and your brand and your organization? Forget about what you sell. Forget about what you offer. It's not about what you make. It's about what you make happen in their life. And when you make something happen in their life that's like really special, they are going to have a jolt of emotion. And I want you to get crystal clear on what you want that emotion to be and put a stake in the ground and determine that emotion. Number two, the gift. Again, this comes back to it's not what you make, but what you make happen. What is the gift? So for instance, Red Bull. What does Red Bull make? They make a commodity energy drink. But what do they make happen? They give you wings. So that's their gift. They give you a pick-me-up, right? Did you know when they first started that way back in like 1974? 84, I can't remember the date. Metashitz, the guy that started it, his brand promise was to give people wings for their ideas and energy. So it was more than just hyping you up, but it's actually to do something bigger than that, to give them their ideas wings. So you've got your emotional promise, you've got the gift, what you make happen in people's lives, and then I want you to think about what is the personality of your brand, and I use simply Carl Jung's 12 archetypes, and I found them to be really, really helpful to help clients start understanding what kind of personality is authentically their own and is expressed through their brand. And this is hugely important because you want your personality to stand out. You want to be consistent in how you message. You don't want to look like Sybil with 12 different personality types coming at them, because that just confuses the brain. So what personality are you? And there's this whole wheel of personality archetypes, and in fact I go into greater depth on this in a slide share. You can see there a bit.ly link, Park Arcs. If you go there after the program, you can pull up a slide deck, and each deck talks about each one of these archetypes in a single deck, or in a single slide, and you can start determining what is the personality that you go to market with, and how can you focus that personality and even have more fun with it. All right, we move on to Chapter 7, the Road of Trials. This is where you actually get to talk about your features and benefits and your functions. This is really the fun part, because you want to think about all the experiences your audiences are going to have, your customers are going to have by adopting your product. And I look at this at 3 primary milestones, or 3 mindsets is really what I should say: brand awareness, brand adoption, brand appreciation. How do you understand your audiences, and which one of these 3 mindsets are they in? Brand awareness, adoption, appreciation. And how do you help them move from one to the next? What milestones of success? So this is where you talk about and show them what the excitement is about adopting your brand. You even take them through some of the things that might happen in changing their status quo. It may get more difficult before it gets better for them, but that's okay, because you're there as their mentor or guide to help see them through, and you can build tremendous brand affiliation that way. Start really, truly building brand evangelists. And we go into, and by the way, in this case, it's what are you going to do? So we know how you're equipped to do it. This is about now, what are you going to do to help them get what they want? We move into Chapter 8, Victory is at Hand. Ask the question, what does success look like? So you take those 3 mindsets, brand awareness, brand adoption, brand appreciation, and you design in success points. So once they get, they adopt into your brand, what do they win? What do they get? What do you give them for free to move them to the next thing? And then once they are buying and using your brand, how do you encourage them to bring others on? Maybe there's discounts, maybe there's, freebies by bringing others on. And then that brand appreciation, as they start sharing your story out. What does success look like for them in each one of these steps? And finally then, or second to finally, in Chapter 9, we talk about the moral of your story. Remember, I mentioned at the top of the show that we are meaning-making machines. Every story you tell out there, your customers and audiences are going to knit together meaning. What are you trying to tell them? They're going to try to figure this out. So I want you to tell your stories with real purpose. So what does success feel like to them? It comes down to, what is the purpose of your overall brand going beyond making money? Why do you exist to help people get what? Now, in my case with the Business of Story exists to help people live into and prosper from their most powerful stories. That's what I do. So what is your brand purpose, and what does that look and feel like to your customers? Because that then leads us to Chapter 10, to be continued. How do you keep them coming back for more? How do you build brand rituals into what you have to sell them, so that when they go through the story cycle system, they may start at brand awareness and they go through one revolution, they've bought in, now you've got the next revolution of brand adoption. So their world changes as they bring you into it. And how do you appreciate that and understand what that journey is so that you can take them through another revolution of the story cycle system into brand appreciation? What does that story look like with the success measurements, and how are you there to celebrate those successes with them? And it just continues. It literally is a growing spiral of engagement with every single revolution. And what I found is when you start approaching brands kind of like a mythologist, truly as a storyteller, you will find a whole new human connection within the brand that you may have never seen before. And it is extraordinarily powerful. So let me just show you some real quick fun examples of this. Nothing too heady, but some really great looks at how you can bring a little bit of storytelling to your content marketing and change your perspective from a content marketer truly to a story marketer. So a lot of the things I do is just with my own photography. I'm a street photographer, and I just have fun out there. I get some good shots and some not so good shots. This, anyways, is our son Parker, our Hollywood filmmaker, and we are sitting on the deck at the Del Coronado in San Diego. And Parker's always up to something, and so he set up this trap to get this bird. And I got the shot. I just cracked up. I love the story of it, and simply put in the little headline, "How effective is your content marketing?" Setup, problem, resolution. You can do this. I mean, you can just look for your visual storytelling. If you've got some imagery that really is powerful and tells a story in its own right, makes people chuckle, gives them some sort of emotional punch, and then add a bit of a call to action or a question to it. I think someone who's done a nice job with this is Onion. Are you familiar with the Onion crazy newspaper and online magazine? Well, Onion Labs is our in-house ad agency, and they do a lot of work for different clients. And I think they do some really nice stuff online on Twitter and Snapchat, Instagram, by using visuals and having some fun with it. But what they're really doing is, as you read through this, like the old forgetful, 1 part Bacardi Superior rum, 3 parts Fresca, stir in highball glass with ice while explaining to your grandparents what you do for a living again. In my case, it would be explaining to my mom and dad what I do for a living again. But they understand their audience, and they have a real fun way of incorporating a little bit of a story into a recipe for Bacardi. Another way, a different way, a more human way of looking at the drink. You know, you got the stovepipe hat on top of Lincoln, who simply apparently is hiding a double jack. It says double jack storage for Jack in the Box. Don't even have to say much there. Just have some fun with it. By the way, Eric Munn, the creative director of Onion Labs, was on my podcast. I do a podcast called Business of Story every Sunday. If you want to hear Eric, he talks about how Onion goes about their storytelling, especially their visual storytelling. And you can go there at the bit.ly link below at Dig Funny. All right, next up. This is something that surprised me. I got a Christmas present from my son Parker this year. From the Sock Club. And the Sock Club send out these one-of-a-kind socks that they make right here in the good old US of A. Every month you get a sock, and with the sock comes this great little story. So what I love about this is they have leveled up a commodity, a sock for crying out loud, into a very meaningful gift, and they charge accordingly for it. So talking about taking your first step out of the primordial muck of commoditization, Sock Club does a brilliant job of doing this, how they communicate with their customers, and how they share this little story with each sock that shows up that is the inspiration behind the sock, and it has a little call to arms for all those that get it. You can listen to that there at bit.ly storyofsockclub.com. I guess not .com, but anyways, moving right along. The opt-out side campaign, REI, one of the best examples of story marketing across the board, using a ton of channels, but truly getting their customers, even their non-customers, at the center of the story, and creating this collective movement on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, when everybody usually races into the malls. They say, don't do that. Opt outside, we're closing our stores, you know, go out with me. I just love that whole campaign. There's a case study on it, a business of story there if you want to learn more about it. Airbnb does a brilliant job of story marketing. This is just one example of one of their ads, but they go out of their way to let both the home renters tell their story, and as well as the guests that show up. They arm them with the ability to tell their Airbnb story not only on Airbnb but through their own channels. And this is just a terrific example of where our audiences are our storytellers. And so you want to be able to give them a platform to tell your story. You are the story maker, but get them to think in events and activities and what happened. And I think Airbnb does a beautiful job with it. Sweden, as my last little example here, actually put the entire country on Airbnb, and they just launched this campaign. And again, it's another little bit of shot at Trump and the closing of borders and nationalism. They're like, no, in fact, everything is open here. They've got a wonderful little video on, like a 3-minute promo video talking about Sweden on Airbnb, and they just do a beautiful job of using story in this and positioning the country as if you're just going to go in and rent the country for a day or 2 or 3 for your own personal vacation. They just really, really well done, taking advantage of something, you know, that's happening around the globe right now, but saying, look, we're not buying into that crap, we're doing our own thing. So, come for the big close. Here we go. If you have been tweeting along and you've been using the story on hashtag along with the VM webinar hashtag, this is what I have to offer. This is my DIY storytelling workbook. I've had thousands of these now downloaded from the website. I will give you, 3 of you, your own interactive PDF version. You can fill it out and go to town on either your personal story or your professional story. And please share this with your friends. This has been an extraordinarily powerful workbook where I brought together all of our findings, put it in here, and take you through the 10 steps, show you examples, and make it very easy for you to clarify your story, start growing revenue, amplify your impact, and believe it or not, when you get your story straight, you also simplify your life. So check it out. And one other way you can simplify your story is my website. I just actually clarified and simplified my own website. You can go to businessofstory.com. You can actually sign up for a free 30-minute impact call. I will sell you absolutely nothing on this call. What I will do is you'll tell me what your story challenge is. We will walk through it. I guarantee at the end of the 30 minutes, we will have clarified your story. You know, it's like the best, most invaluable free advice you could possibly get around your story. So feel free to go fill out my little form. I do ask a couple questions about you because you are also helping me in this process have a better understanding of what are the story challenges that you have day in and day out so that I can even target and clarify my story and my tools that much more. Finally, I would like to end with this one thought. No matter how you are using story, if you are or aren't, I'm hoping that I've ignited that true superpower inside of you, that storyteller. And I always want you to remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a good one. And I'd like to also thank Vertical Measures for having me today on this very wonderful, important webinar. And I hope that I brought the goods for you to go out and reignite your inner storyteller. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Park. That was great. We really appreciate you taking some time out and doing the webinar for us. That was we got great feedback, and it was a lot of fun listening to that. I just want to remind everyone before we get into the Q&A that we will be sending this the slides and recording out tomorrow, as long as you registered, which you did, to all our listeners. Okay, so let's get to the questions. We're kind of short on time, so we're only going to do about 4, but let's get going. Can you share again the moral of your story and why the business of story exists?
Yes. The moral, and I would often say that's in chapter 9. I would ask you to even start with the moral because it's going to help give you focus to your story. The story, you know, as we identified early, every story you tell, whether it's a knock-knock joke or a big, long white paper, has meaning about it, and our brains are going to search for that meaning. Your brand has meaning about it that your customers are searching for the meaning. When you get really focused on what your purpose is, the purpose-driven brand, you know, the purpose-driven part of your brand, that becomes the moral of your story. What do you do? Why do you exist beyond making money? Forget the making money part. But if you focus on your purpose, on how you elevate, empower, and help your customers grow, you will have success beyond your wildest imagination. And I think the reason why that is what I said at the beginning of the show. Brands no longer own the influence of mass media, so we can't cram content and sales down people's throat. Masses are the media, and they're flipping the bird at brands. They're saying, screw you, you can't treat me like that anymore. So brands have to soften. Brands have to find a purpose greater than themselves to go out and not only maintain and retain their millennial workforce, but connect with people on a much more powerful way. And once you figure out what your purpose is, much like this image of the pencil here, and you put a fine point on what you do in your purpose, that you will, connect with people like these hearts sitting there like you never have before. So simply answer the question, my brand exists to help people do what? Business of Story exists to help people live into and prosper from their most powerful story. But you got to find your story first. You got to clarify it first before you can get there. I hope that helps.
I hope it helps too. It's not easy, but I think these listeners are they got a
They're
good
smart. They're smart.
Yeah, they got a good path to go down now. This one's a little bit of a vague question. I'll let you decide how you want to answer it, but can you explain the gift chapter again?
Yeah, the gift is the enter the mentor. This is where you really focus on your brand in 3 significant ways. So let me go backwards on those 3 ways. First, your personality. What is the personality of the brand? Are you a rebel? Are you the guy or gal next door? Are you a hero? You go through those 12 different archetypes, and you've got to get crystal clear on what is your authentic personality. And then you got to make sure that all your content, all your story marketing is spoken, shared, and expressed through that personality. You'll find once you really identify what your personality is, that you're probably like Sybil, and you're talking in lots of different ways with lots of different attitudes in different channels, and you want to fine-tune that. So going back to the gift, the best way to think about the gift is it's not what you make, but it's what you make happen in people's lives. That's what your stories are about. Your stories aren't about features and functions. Your stories are about benefits and how you empower people. So what is that gift? My gift through the business of story is I reignite a superpower in you. And that is the power of story to move audiences like you never have before. And then finally, what we first started with in there was the emotional promise. And why I ask you to look at the emotional promise, a way to go through this, by the way, is think of 9 one-word descriptors that best define your brand, and then go and find a story that backs up each one of those descriptors. You'll end up with 9 different stories that shows you how you live into this brand story and how you support people. So it could be innovation, creativity, trust, loyalty, whatever. Go and find a story, an authentic story, write it that backs up each one of those descriptors. Out of those stories, you're going to find the one overall word that's going to define the emotional promise people get by interacting with your brand. See, what I'm ultimately trying to do is get you to do a mind meld and get you out of your operational brain and into your right brain so that you create a true personality with emotional impact about your brand. I guess it's best summed up with, we buy with our hearts and we justify our purchases with our heads. But we're always selling to our heads when we should be story marketing to the hearts of our customers.
Okay, well, kind of following, I don't know if it's a direct follow-up, but another question we had is, I work in a very niche industry. How do I create stories in that industry?
Go and find them. So I don't want you to create them. I don't want you to invent them. That's the old way of doing advertising, and I'm not even sure that that's what the question was intended to be. But when I started in the ad world 30 years ago, we were always making up stories, and more creative, more clever, the better. What I want you to do in your niche, and by the way, you're in a niche industry, you are already ahead of the gang because you want to get a sharp focus on what that story is. Go out and find the stories. First, identify those 9 descriptors for your brands, then go out and find the true stories, the authentic stories that have happened with your customers, with your company, with your customer service, and find at least one story for each one of those descriptors. You don't have to make up stories. This is all about finding the story, spotting them in the wild, and then sharing them with people. It's what our brain wants. Our brain wants true stories well told about people going through something, having an event that they had to overcome, and they benefited at the end of the journey. And oh, by the way, they benefited at the end of the journey because of you, the brand, you as our mentor or guide. So don't make them up. Go find them.
Okay, and let's finish on this last question. How can I clarify my story?
Start with what do you do better than anybody else? Or also go to businessofstory.com and sign up for a free impact call.
There you go.
What I will ask you in that call is to get super crystal clear on what you do better than anybody else in a business. I give you a quick example, Zach, if we have time.
Sure.
I got a call from a young marketing executive in Oxford, England. Young lady, very sharp. She had, graduated from college. She had been in advertising and marketing for 5 years. She and her husband had 2 boys. She took some time off, about 7, 8 years, as the kids were growing. She got them back into school, and she said, I don't just want to be sitting around the house. I want to reinvigorate my career. So, and she wanted the flexibility of being a marketing consultant. So she called me and connected. This is about a year ago, and she said, Park, I need to start building my business, but I'm like one of 1,000 different marketing consultants out here. How do I clarify my story? So I simply asked her, Karina, what do you do better than anybody else? And we found her answer in 3 areas that you can look for your same answer. First, I said, what did you like to do as a little girl? She said, art. Love to be an artist, love to be a painter, still do it to this day. And I said, why didn't you make a profession out of it? She goes, no, I didn't want to soil it with having to try to earn money. I just loved doing it. And I said, what did you learn from being an artist? And she said, connecting dots. I was able to figure out, it taught me how to see different dots, pull them together, and create new imagery out of different things. So it really replugged my brain. And I said, right on. So what'd you do? What'd you study in college? She goes, well, psychology. Got a degree in psychology. And I go, how come you didn't follow that profession? Well, again, I was really interested in it, but not so much that I wanted to make a career out of it. And I said, so then what did you do? Well, I got a job in marketing, in technology marketing in particular. And what I was really good at that even surprised me is that I could take these very arcane, complex subjects and simplify them, boil them down into really interesting, compelling copy that anybody could read, and that was what I became the go-to source for. And I said, why do you think that was? She goes, well, I really think all my work in art and design helped my brain mold to that, and then certainly studying psychology helped me understand the function of all that. So what we did is we took those 3 points together, and we said, you know what, Karina, you are the high-tech marketing consultant to hire for complex issues because you know how the brain is designed to buy. And she used that, and it was like this light bulb went off in her head, and now she had an absolute clear focus that she was the Oxford marketing consultant for high-tech businesses that would help them with their complex subjects because she understands how the mind is designed to buy. That helped her clarify her story, that then it impacted how she went about her website. She said she would go to networking events. She could tell that in a single phrase, and people are going, oh, you're the high-tech marketing consultant, complex person. Okay, got that. That's how you go about it. You get crystal clear on what your focus is and what your superpower, beyond just being a good storyteller, of what you bring to the world that is uniquely your own. And I guarantee it, you have something that is uniquely you that nobody else could ever offer, and that's the story you want to clarify. That's the story you want to find, and that's the story you want to tell.
Well, I think that's a great story to end this story marketing webinar. So, Park, thanks again. This is great. I think I enjoyed it. I'm sure our listeners really enjoyed it. So thanks to everyone for tuning in. We will have another webinar next month with Nancy Harhut. She will be presenting a webinar on persuasive copy. So we will be sending out information on that later, so stay tuned. Again, I'm Zach, and we'd like to thank all of you from Vertical Measures for coming and tuning in today, and we'll see you again next month. Thanks again, Park.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate being here.
Bye.